Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Shewey. I am the founder and CEO of Happily. We are the world's largest network of virtual and live event specialists. We're also the most diverse network, which is what I'm most proud of. And we produce unique, fun, carbon zero events. And every week I bring up like a friend and a colleague to just share a little bit of insight with something that's happening that's a massive trend in our world today. And today, I'm very excited to introduce y'all to David Spinks, who is the founder of CMX, co-founder of CMX, currently the VP of Community at Bevy, and a newly minted author of the book, The Business of Belonging. So David, earlier I was asking David, like, how many people are like a VP of community, like in the world right now? Because right now I think that like this notion of any like forward facing, brand or organization needs to have a community manager or community leader, but a VP of community is a title that you don't hear that often. So I was just curious, how is this VP of community like role, and how does the sort of structure of community, how is that stacked up and grown over time?
Yeah, I think it's growing a lot. We just did the community industry report. It's like our annual research at CMX, and community teams are growing. The amount of companies with dedicated community managers are growing, and community professionals are moving up more in seniority, which is an awesome sign. Like our mission with CMX is to advance the community industry, and a huge representation of that is if companies are putting experienced community builders in positions of power within their organization, that's a really good sign, because then that means they're really investing in community and putting resources behind it. So I don't know, I would guess like 50 to 100 VPs of community these days. I think I mentioned like chief community officers actually becoming a real thing now, and there's probably about like 10 really legit ones out there, and so I think that's going to continue to grow.
You had a really, I mean, this is like a really key insight that you had back in, when did you start CMX, in 2014,
14.
right? Yeah, 2014. So like, what was the moment where you had that like sort of light bulb or aha moment that you were onto something bigger, a movement that was bigger than just, a hunch?
I think it was probably after that first event, because my first job out of college 13, 14 years ago was a community manager role. And at that point, there weren't really community managers for brands. There was some like internal community kind of stuff. There was gaming community managers. But for brands, it just wasn't really something you saw. And when you said community management, people still thought social media management. Like, oh, okay, so you manage like the Facebook page or the Twitter account. It's like, no, no, it's not that. And so I just had to kind of learn how to do this work on my own. I didn't have a lot of people to look to, or networks to turn to, or trainings. And just over time, started meeting more people who are doing this work. I co-founded the communitymanager.com with Jen Peety and Brad Petersell as a place to just start writing about this stuff and sharing jobs and sharing insights. And then it wasn't until 2014 launching the conference where it was still at that point like part of my professional identity, but not something that I would have said at that point was like, this is my life's work. Actually, I was running a startup called Feast that taught people how to cook right before I started CMX. So it was a completely different world, just trying to be an entrepreneur. But I launched that event with Max Altshuler, and almost like as a side project of like, all right, yeah, let's see how this goes. And just seeing the response and the energy of the people who showed up in that room. We had 300 people come from all over the world who were all legit community professionals. And they would walk in and look around and be like everyone here is building community for a business. I don't have to explain what I do 100 times like I do at every other tech conference I go to. And so they felt like they finally had a space that understood them and were surrounded by people who were like them. And for me, that's when I was like, oh shit, this is awesome and feels great. And this is what I should be doing. So I wound down my previous startup and turned my full-time focus over to CMX.
Okay, and for those who are out there who don't know what a community manager is or what a legit community manager is, could you describe that for us?
Yeah. So the simplest way to understand what it means when a business is building community, for one, you have to distinguish between community as like a cultural and emotional value and community as a business operation. We all know what community is as an emotional value or cultural value. We've hopefully experienced it at some point in our life, a sense of belonging, connection, shared purpose, feeling like you are connected to a group of people. And that's the foundation of this work. You need that. That's the fuel that makes it all work. And businesses are starting to become aware of that and make community a really core value for both internally, how do we make employees feel like they belong? And then externally, how do we make customers, partners, investors feel like they're all connected and they belong? But once you have that foundation of that emotion, that belonging, then you can start to think about what is our like community operation? What are the programs we can run to now empower those people who feel like they're a part of something and now they want to contribute, they want to get involved? How do you empower and activate those people to get involved and start taking action? And that can take many different forms within a company, whether it's empowering customers to answer questions for each other on a support forum, empowering customers to self-organize events and educational programs to teach each other how to use your product or to advocate for your brand. It could be councils or community spaces where you're collecting feedback and insights that are helping you improve your product. But the simple difference is like traditional businesses have always been about marketing and building an audience. And to build an audience, you essentially just like help people, you create value, a product, something that they consume. To build a community, you help people help each other. You create spaces and platforms for them to create value for each other rather than you, the business, having to create all the value for them.
And you had at CMX, there's over 20,000, right? Like community professionals,
Yeah,
which is astounding to go from that 300 to 20,000. And is it more? It's probably even more now.
I think it's probably
Um,
more now. Yeah. Yeah. And that's across like we have multiple different spaces and channels and just all the different ways that people engage with CMX.
and like, so, what are some of the best practices, I guess, of community management today? When you're talking about a a business around community management can get a little bit tricky, right?
Hmm.
To go from, sort of like everyone's talking about like an authentic brand and engaging community in a way that you're getting people to work and help and support each other. But ultimately, does it come down to a dollar value, or what's the best practice in terms of like a healthy community inside of a business?
Yeah, and look, like it's a balance, right? Like in the book, I share kind of a Venn diagram of like value to the business and value to the members, and where they overlap is where there's a lot of opportunity. If you go into building community and you are only optimizing for profit, you're not really focusing on how you serve members and really give them a true sense of connection and belonging and value. Then your community is not going to have engagement. People aren't going to show up. It takes a lot of effort, especially today where people have an abundance of options for community to get them to show up in your space, in your community and contribute. It's really hard. So you have to focus on the member. But on the flip side, if you only focus on creating engagement and you're not starting with an understanding of what is the business objective you're trying to drive and how it will ultimately result in ROI, what you'll end up having is like a community that's engaged, but you can't justify the investment. You don't know what the return is. The community team will just keep building engagement, hosting more events, hosting more spaces, because like engagement is infinite. You can do anything to engage people. If you don't understand what end you're working toward, then you're going to have a really hard time figuring out what to prioritize and focus on. And our research actually showed that only 12% of community teams feel confident in their ability to measure the business value of community today. And that's number one reason community programs fail is for lack of resources, lack of support and resources. So it's really important that you find this balance of both, authentically investing in community and people and living your values. Like to me, that's what an authentic brand is you don't just say what these values are, you practice them regularly and you show them and display them. And you're doing so in a way that's adding up into sustainable business value so that you can continue to invest in growing those programs.
And events, we have the same like issue with like the events industry where like I'm constantly like going and like trying to give as many like free resources and talks about like how to measure your ROIs, because once you start to like measure your ROI on events, then you can defend a budget, right?
Absolutely.
What is the metric for success, or what, some of the key levers where that that you are achieving ROI with your community?
Yeah. So, it starts with understanding the business objective that you're trying to achieve. We use something called the spaces model at CMX, and you can read all about that in the book. And I share lots of examples, but spaces stands for support, product, acquisition, contribution, engagement, and success. And so each of those are objectives that a community program can drive for the business. And in the book, I share a table of 3 metrics that are directly tied back to ROI, to the bottom line, for each one of those objectives. So you can see how building engagement in that community, growing that community program, will result in measurable business impact. And what's really important is that you focus, because community is this, it's like a broad thing. It's like gasoline you could throw onto any fire in the company and it will really accelerate it. But what community teams end up doing, and I think a lot of event teams end up doing, is they try to like tackle all these objectives, right? Like we're going to get product feedback, we're going to get new customers, we're going to retain customers, we're going to have a support space, and you try to do too many things at once, and you over extend yourself. Now you're accountable for way too many metrics. You have way too many different like platforms and tools. There are different kinds of members who want to participate in all those different spaces. So I think it's really important to understand like what is your primary objective that you are really accountable to and working toward, and whether that's community or events, which in my opinion, events are just touch points for communities. Events are critical to communities. Events are really powerful for driving like pipeline and acquisition, and you can actually see who attended our event, what percentage of those people were customers, what percentage were prospects, what percentage of them were leads. And you can actually use that as a touch point that tells you very clearly how much value did this drive for the business. And if you can do that, then you get buy-in for, okay, we can grow the business with this. Now, I also think we can get great product feedback. Now I need, this is the budget and the tools and the staff and the things I need to run that kind of program, and you add to it from there.
Yeah, and I feel like with the explosion of virtual events over the past year now, right? Oh, God, like a whole year of virtual. It's crazy, right? So, but the silver lining there is like we now have low cost tools to be able to engage community more frequently, right?
Totally.
And would love to know like how events, will play, or how events like, and at Bevy, right, which is a virtual event platform that's fantastic. We love working with Bevy, and, just like, what have you seen over as the VP of Community at Bevy, and like how people are using virtual events in that platform in order to engage their communities?
Yeah. So it's been, I mean, I remember like you and I hanging out in person at that last CMX Summit in 2019, and just thinking about how much has changed since the last time we've hung out in person is wild. For anyone in the event world, we've all just been thrown for a loop. I think what happened now is like everyone's been woken up to the value and impact of virtual events. Like, I don't know, people probably don't remember this at this point, and it was just a year ago, but before like COVID, virtual events still felt like an extremely novel idea. Like the idea of a virtual conference, people were like, it felt like weird. Like, why would how would you do that? Like, what would that even look
like? Like avatars in the Sims.
Yeah, it's like it doesn't even make sense. And now it's like the only thing we've experienced for years, so it makes sense. And so yes, businesses have seen that they are highly scalable, a lot more affordable. You can reach a lot more people. Like our last in-person summit had 1,000 people register, and our last virtual one had 5,000, to show you the kind of scale. And like we didn't grow 5x in the community, so I think it's the platform that changed. You can reach more people. It's more accessible. People from all over the world can attend, so it has a lot of value, and you can do things more frequently. And so we're running like 4 events a month right now. Like we're just banging them out because it's pretty easy to do. And frequency is a really important part of community, but so is proximity. And like the reality is, virtual tools do not give you the same sense of proximity and connection and serendipity that you get in person. And so, what I think will happen is we'll see programs become more hybrid. I'm being specific with my words here. Programs will be more hybrid, but I'm skeptical that events will be hybrid. I think
Talk to me more
programs,
about that. Yeah.
yeah, like an ongoing event program, right? Think about it as like 12 months of events that you're going to host. You're going
I
to
see.
probably, and companies are probably going to have a mix of in-person and virtual events. Um, but a hybrid event itself is probably not going to happen as much as people are talking about right now, because I've worked on large scale hybrid events. I've worked on very small hybrid events. And the idea of a hybrid event is it's simultaneously existing online and in person. And I just think it's like, it's hard. It's a lot harder to do than people think. It's a lot more expensive to do than people think. It's not an ideal experience for people, because people who are watching online generally just feel left out from the in-person experience. People in person feel like overwhelmed by all the online people, and they just want to talk to the people there in person. So I think like we'll kind of go back to, yeah, we can live stream it and there'll be a chat, but it probably won't expand too much more than that. But I think virtual events themselves are here to stay, because they provide a really scalable balance to the very time and cost intensive in-person events.
Yeah, I mean, I like to explain to people that a hybrid event is really two events happening at the same
Yes,
time.
exactly.
Because the reality is that the people who are live and in person, I mean, take the Grammys, take any event based award show that is broadcast and people are watching it live, from their homes. The people that are in the room, they don't want to watch the TV of everybody on Zoom, their audience looking at them, and the audience at home, they're either watching independently or maybe I think we might see, and I actually thought that Bevy would see a lot of this, in your community there would see quite a lot of like regional meetups.
Yes.
So like at TED, we have the TED conference, and that's live stream. And then there's TEDx organizers who are hosting their own satellite versions of the TED event and watching the experience together. And it's really great and it's super fun.
Totally. Yeah, we've seen a lot of that. So Bevy's like bread and butter started as it's a platform for your community powered events. So you have local chapters that are run by community members. You give them all the tools to run their local chapters, but you as a central organizing body get all the data. You could standardize like branding and structure and process and all of that. So you can really scale up events like that. And we saw things like Webflow's World Tour, where they had events for different regions. And then that actually turned into a whole lot of local chapter applications that they got out of that program. We saw GDG, Google Developer Groups, did their global event, and they had like, I think 200 simultaneous events that were organized by their local chapters. And I think those are going to grow really rapidly as the vaccine gets distributed, because I think the first things that will come back are the smaller, more local regional events. And so we're going to see companies really look to tap into that. And the only way to do that at scale is to empower your community. Like you as a company, it's a perfect example of like unlocking that scale and helping people help each other. You as a company will only be able to host so many events on the ground level. You're probably not going to hire someone in every region where you have customers, in every region where your audience exists. But by opening up the platform for people to apply to become hosts, just like, TEDx, people had to, get actual licensed. So it's very intense for TEDx, but you have an application, you have a playbook that you give them, and you teach them how to run their local chapters. And that's how you can really end up scaling things like GDG with 1,000 chapters. Salesforce Trailblazers has 1,000 local chapters. Duolingo is running 2,600 events per month at their peak with a team of 3 people. So those kinds of like chapter-based event programs, I think, are going to explode even more than they were before as people are able to gather in person again.
I mean, 2,600 events per month, one company is so impressive. What are like when you're getting to that scale, right? Because everybody's read your book. If we have not shown you a picture of David's beautiful book. Let's please like fly this baby in. Woo woo.
There she is.
Look at that. I wish we had a picture of your baby too, and we could just like put the two of
This is
your.
one of my babies. Yeah, I also we my the quick story there is my baby was due the same week as my manuscript, so it's been a very busy year, but it's a very good deadline for getting a book done.
It's congratulations,
Thank you.
on both fronts. It's really pretty amazing. But back to sort of like once you get to, so like I was saying, like once you read David's book and get to this like massive scale, what are the things that I don't know, what's like the best thing that you can see out of this like massive quantity? Like what's the goal there? And what's something that like people should watch out for?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, like the goal for a lot of businesses is to do things at scale. And that's why community is so exciting, is it unlocks unprecedented scale and it compounds, right? Like Duolingo didn't start off with that many events a month. They start off with just a few to start, and then it grew and grew and grew from there. Or like Nextdoor is a really one of my favorite examples of scale. It's like they are in, I think, over 90% of neighborhoods in the US today. And I talked with Sarah Leary for the book, who's the co-founder, and she told a story of how like to launch their first neighborhood, they started with one. They literally went to the housing board and pitched like the local housing board on letting them use Nextdoor for the local community. They got approval, and then they went door to door knocking on people's doors, asking them to come join the platform. So super hands-on, super like intimate. And then it goes from one neighborhood to two to four to eight to 16 to 32 to 64. And it has a compounding effect. But you start small, and that's the goal for businesses though, is like you reach this really great scale. So that's the objective. And going back to the spaces model, as long as you're tying it back to one of those key goals, then just think about the kind of growth you can drive for your business, or retention of your customers, or product feedback you can get when you're running literally thousands of local events per month. One thing to look out for is just it's frankly like most companies try to get to scale, but they hit these like plateaus and they hit these ceilings that are usually operational limitations. Because what most companies do, what most community teams do when they start, are they do those things that don't scale, but then they really struggle to start to transition into more automated or scalable, repeatable models. And so let's say you're launching these local chapters and you're organizing it all in a spreadsheet, or you're using all these disparate tools and you're asking your local organizers to like send back your RSVP data and send back your attendee data and send back your survey data. That will only work until like about 50 chapters is generally what we see. And so creating, a really clear playbook and using tools and technology that will help you repeat it and automate it and get all that stuff together in a sustainable way is the only way that you'll actually be able to ultimately scale up to that many chapters, to that many programs, and set up those local chapter leaders to be successful, because your goal is to remove the barriers that they have to be successful. And you can only do that in a hands-on way up to a certain point.
I guess my last question is like, I was asking you before, like what communities you belong to, and you're like, oh, the chef never eats, right?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna switch it up a little bit and just ask you to share with us a little bit more about. I think that the CMX community that you built is really special, and would just love for you to share maybe like a story that illustrates like how you felt that you actually belong within your own community at CMX.
Yeah. That's a deep question. Do I belong to my own community? I mean, in some ways, it's like when you are leading a community, you don't get that same experience that members get, and like you feel a responsibility to take care of everyone else. It's rare that you hear from people often. Like those little moments are always the most special things to me. Is when someone comes to me and says like, I came to an event 3 years ago and I met this person and that led to this job that completely changed my life. And it's all because of CMX. Like those are the really meaningful things. I mean, I think like when I feel it, it's when I'm in a really hard place. And I mean, even this past week, honestly, like I ended up tweeting it out, and I share this stuff in my community a lot because, like, yeah, publish a book, had a baby, we just raised our Series C for Bevy, like we're growing our team exponentially. It's just like as busy as I've ever been, and my personality is to like just take on as much as possible and just figure it out. So I just took on more and more, and just started dealing with like a lot of anxiety, and recently it started to affect my health. And so I shared that out. Like I shared on Twitter, I share those things with the community, and just seeing like the responses that I get when I'm able to share those things transparently, and seeing how people show up in those moments, that's when I'm like, oh shit, this is like a real community, and I feel really supported.
That's really beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, David, it's been a pleasure. Again, congratulations. Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. Everyone follow. It's just at your name, at David Spinks on Twitter.
At David Spinks on Twitter. I tweet a lot.
Uh, he tweets a lot and it's all really great. And be a part of that CMX community if you're a community manager curious about how to grow businesses. And of course, don't forget to buy the book, The Business of Belonging. So with that, see y'all next week.
Thanks so
Bye.
much. Appreciate it.